Okay, so looking at the critical thinking question, behavioral therapy and early behavioral therapy versus cognitive behavioral therapy, and the um, differences in outcomes there. And so when I think of like old school behavioral therapy, this might sound wrong, but what comes to mind is manipulation. It was really all about, either adding or taking away some type of stimulus in order to get a change in behavior. So that's where we see like classical conditioning and all of that. And I think that works to an extent, but I think that there isn't a lot of it really accounts. It needs to have follow through from everybody involved for that to necessarily work. And I feel like when they were actively engaged in treatment and they had this kind of like a positive or negative consequence or enforcement with that, then they were able to see those results. But once they were taken out of treatment, and if that wasn't whatever was happening in that therapeutic setting wasn't then carried on in a different setting, then it was easily lost. Because I feel like it was based off of the idea of manipulating, and not so much getting to the root and restructuring. And I think that's where cognitive behavioral therapy is different. Is it really it takes a look into like restructuring. It goes a little bit deeper into thought processes of why we do what we do. There still is that that positive and negative reinforcement that has been found helpful. But we see today positive reinforcement is been shown to be the most successful in getting treatment outcomes, and so that's where, like in parenting, you'll see stuff like planned ignoring and different like reward systems and things like that. And I think we have learned a lot from where we began with behavioral therapy and where it's gone, and focus more on the positive aspects and that healthy communication and different more modern interventions. This is one that is used the most in substance use treatment, is cognitive behavioral therapy, because you really like looking at the ABC method. You really that whole thought stopping process is super important. Like we call it playing the tape through, so like you have your activating event, and then you have that your belief behind whatever's going on, so whatever your perception is to that. And then that C is like where you weigh the consequences of what may happen, and that really is playing the tape through. So but when you're working with a family, you really learn how all these activating events are happening and playing off of each other, and how whatever belief that the individual has, and then the response to that belief, or their physical or verbal reaction to their mental reaction or their mental process through that, is where you kind of like, that's where that restructuring happens. That's where, with working with each other and with that positive communication, the positive reinforcement, and not giving attention to the negative, and providing focusing on the positive, has been, from what I've seen, I've seen good outcomes within families and also within individuals using basic CBT interventions. I think it's probably the most widely used, and has the most. There are so many different, kind of reminds me of Common Core. There's so many different types of behavioral therapies or CBT that in little like models that basically do the same thing, where it just gets to like, what are you thinking? What's the emotion behind the thought? What is your reaction to that emotion? and what is the outcome to that reaction. And so it's really just stopping and thinking through that whole process and working with a family to kind of identify that those patterns and those structures and how everybody plays off of each other is important. And then having whatever that positive reward might be, which would, and this could just be a positive family dynamics, but with children, it could be, even just praise. People don't put enough weight into how much praise goes for a person, just that acknowledgement. And that so that's a big one I think that we see in cognitive behavioral therapy too, is even just that verbal praise is a great form of positive reinforcement. I think this is a very, very widely used approach, probably most familiar for most people. And I think we've all probably seen that one clip a million times from, I can't even remember the name of the show, that there's a Sheldon on there. I never watched the show, but I've seen that video and that example of classical conditioning a million times, so I'm sure you guys all know what I'm talking about. But this is a very widely used one, and a very an effective one, I believe. And this one's a lot easier to, the more modern interventions, I think, is easier to take and apply into your everyday life than maybe some of the early interventions of behavioral therapy. So, thank you.